Andrew Foster stared at the data pad his daughters had just placed in front of him, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. The title glowed in cheerful pink letters, Operation, Find Daddy Someone Who Makes Him Smile Again. Below it sat a graph showing his happiness levels over the past 2 years, represented by a sad little line that drooped lower and lower like a wilting flower. Girls, he started, but Claire held up her hand in a gesture that looked far too serious for a 9-year-old. Please let us finish the presentation, Daddy, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of determination that meant she and her sister had rehearsed this moment a dozen times. Megan tapped the screen, advancing to the next slide. A list of names appeared, each with a small photo and a series of colorful stars next to them. Andrew recognized several faces from around Horizon Station. The Centauri medical officer, the human botanist from the agricultural section, even the Andraxian shuttle pilot who always waved at the girls. We've been conducting research, Megan announced, sounding remarkably like a tiny scientist. For 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. You've been what? Andrew set his coffee down with a small thud. Claire beamed at him. We made a list. See, we watched people around the station. We looked for specific qualities. She counted on her fingers. 1. Are they nice to kids? 2. Do they make you smile when you talk to them? 3. Do they have kind eyes? 4. Would they fit in our family? Andrew felt something tight clench in his chest. His daughters had been worried about him. Watching him. Noticing things he thought he'd hidden well enough behind his work and his routine of making their meals and helping with homework and tucking them in at night. And we scored everyone, Megan continued, clearly excited now. 10 points for each category. The person at the top has 37 points. Out of 40? Andrew asked, unable to stop himself. Nobody's perfect, Daddy, Claire said with the wisdom of someone far older than 9. But 37 is really, really good. Andrew looked at his daughters, identical faces framed by brown hair pulled into matching ponytails, brown eyes that were far too perceptive, watching him with a mixture of hope and concern. They'd been living on Horizon Station for almost 3 years now, ever since Sarah died. 3 years of adjusting to life without their mother, of learning to navigate a multicultural space station where hundreds of alien species lived and worked alongside humans. They'd been so brave through all of it. Why are you doing this? He asked softly. The twins exchanged one of their mysterious looks, that silent twin communication he'd never quite figured out. Because you're sad, Daddy, Megan said finally. You try to hide it, but we know. You make us laugh and you play games with us and you make really good pancakes, Claire added. But sometimes when you think we're not looking, your face gets all empty. Andrew felt his throat tighten. He thought he was doing better. He got up every day, went to work as a diplomatic liaison, negotiated trade agreements and cultural exchanges, came home to his girls, helped them with their studies. He smiled and laughed and lived his life. But apparently he hadn't fooled the 2 people who mattered most. We miss Mommy too, Megan said quietly. But she wouldn't want you to be alone forever. The simple truth of it hit Andrew like a physical blow. Sarah would have hated seeing him like this, going through the motions, keeping himself carefully contained, avoiding any situation that might lead to connection or vulnerability. So we made a plan, Claire said, tapping the data pad again. A new slide appeared showing the upcoming Unity Festival, the massive cultural celebration held twice a year where every species on the station showcased their traditions, food, art, and music. The festival is in 4 days. Everyone will be there. We can go together and you can meet some of the people on our list. Just meet them, Megan emphasized. Just talk. See if maybe someone makes your eyes crinkle when you smile. They haven't crinkled in a really long time. Andrew looked at the presentation again, at the careful thought his daughters had put into every detail. They'd even included a schedule for the festival, highlighting which cultural exhibits would be most interesting, which food stalls served things he liked, and optimal times for casual social interaction opportunities. You 2 have really thought this through, he said. We're very organized, Claire said proudly. We learned from watching you work. Andrew sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by a complicated swirl of emotions. Pride in his incredibly thoughtful daughters. Guilt that they'd felt the need to do this. Fear at the thought of opening himself up to someone new. And beneath it all, a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe hope, or maybe just the acknowledgement that he couldn't hide his loneliness from the people who knew him best. Please, Daddy? Megan asked. We're not trying to replace Mommy. We know nobody could ever do that. We want you to be happy again. Really happy, not just pretend happy. Andrew looked at his daughters, at their hopeful faces and their carefully prepared presentation and their 9-year-old wisdom that somehow cut straight to the truth of things. He could say no. He could explain that he wasn't ready, that it was too complicated, that dating as a widower with kids on a space station where half the population wasn't even human was more than he could handle right now. But he looked at those faces and couldn't bring himself to disappoint them. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go to the festival. All 3 of us together. And I'll try to be open to meeting people. But I'm not making any promises beyond that." The twins erupted in matching squeals of delight, launching themselves at him for a double hug that nearly knocked him out of his chair. Andrew wrapped his arms around them, feeling their warmth and their joy and their absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. He just hoped he wouldn't let them down. He hoped that maybe, somehow they were right. That somewhere out there, someone might make his eyes crinkle again when he smiled. Even if the thought of it terrified him completely. The Unity Festival had transformed Horizon Station's Central Plaza into something from a dream. Everywhere Andrew looked, there were colors he couldn't name and lights that pulsed in rhythms from a dozen different worlds. The air smelled like cinnamon and something sharp and sweet he didn't recognize. Music played from multiple directions at once, drums and wind instruments and electronic harmonies that somehow blended together instead of clashing. Claire and Megan pulled him through the crowds, their heads swiveling in every direction as they took in the sights. They'd been to festivals before, but their excitement never dimmed. Andrew let them lead, content to follow and enjoy their joy. A group of Centauri dancers performed on a raised platform, their movements graceful and synchronized. Food stalls lined the walkways, offering everything from Earth pizza to Andraxian protein spheres that glowed faintly purple. "Try this, Daddy." Megan thrust a stick of something toward him. He took a cautious bite and found it tasted like honey mixed with mint. "That's good," he admitted, and the vendor, a small furry being with 6 eyes, chittered happily. They wandered past art displays and technology demonstrations. Claire wanted to stop at every single booth, asking questions in her curious, earnest way. Andrew found himself relaxing despite his earlier nervousness. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe they'd just enjoy the festival as a family, and his daughters would forget about their matchmaking scheme. That hope lasted another 20 minutes. They just finished watching a performance by a troupe of Velonian acrobats when Andrew felt both his hands suddenly gripped tight. Claire had his left hand, Megan his right, and they were both standing absolutely still, staring at something across the plaza. "That one, Daddy," they whispered together, their voices perfectly synchronized in that eerie twin way. Andrew followed their gaze, already forming a polite smile, already preparing to meet whoever they'd picked. Maybe the friendly botanist he'd chatted with a few times. Maybe the human teacher from the station school. Then he saw who they were looking at and everything inside him went very still. She stood near a display of engineering projects, tall enough that she stood out even in the mixed crowd. Her skin was the deep blue of midnight, marked with patterns that glowed faintly silver in the festival lights. She had 4 arms, 2 at shoulder height, 2 emerging from her sides just below her ribs, and she was using all of them to adjust something on the display in front of her. Her face was angular and strong, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern that could track multiple things at once. She was Threndian. And Andrew knew exactly who she was. The memory hit him like cold water. 6 months ago. The alarm screaming through the residential section. The pressure breach that came out of nowhere, explosive decompression tearing through the corridor. Andrew had been in his office when it happened, Claire and Megan at their after-school program 3 sections away, right in the path of the breach. He'd run. Sprinted through corridors while emergency bulkheads slammed down around him. By the time he'd reached the residential section, the breach had been contained, but the area was chaos. Debris everywhere. People being treated for injuries. And there, near the emergency shelter entrance, he'd seen a Threndian engineer in a damaged work suit, still checking people, still making sure everyone was safe. She'd been the one carrying his daughters. 1 girl in each of her upper arms, holding them secure against her chest while her lower arms worked to clear debris from the shelter entrance. Claire had been crying. Megan had looked stunned and scared. But they'd been alive, unharmed except for a few scrapes. Andrew had grabbed his daughters, held them so tight they'd squeaked in protest. He'd looked at the engineer, at Kira, though he hadn't known her name then, and he'd meant to thank her. Meant to say something, anything to express his gratitude. But his throat had been too tight and the emergency crews were shouting and his daughters were safe in his arms and he just nodded. 1 quick nod of acknowledgement before he'd carried his girls away to medical for examination. He'd never gone back. Never found her to say thank you properly. The crisis had passed, Life had returned to normal, and he'd let it slip away in the rush of daily routine and the relief of knowing his daughters were safe. And now they were pointing at her. Of all the people on this station, of all the possibilities, his daughters had chosen her. "You know her?" Claire asked, tugging his hand. She'd clearly noticed the recognition on his face. "She's the one who saved us," Megan said softly, and Andrew realized his daughters hadn't forgotten. Of course they hadn't. They'd been scared and hurt, and this woman had carried them to safety. Shame burned hot in Andrew's chest. What kind of person didn't properly thank someone who'd saved their children's lives? What kind of diplomat was he if he couldn't even manage basic gratitude? But there was something else beneath the shame. Something he didn't want to examine too closely. When his daughters had said they'd chosen someone, he'd unconsciously pictured someone easier. Someone human, maybe, or at least humanoid. Someone who wouldn't stand out so much, who wouldn't require explaining to his family back on Earth, who wouldn't force him to confront his own complicated feelings about interspecies relationships. He'd told himself he was open-minded. He worked with dozens of species every day. He respected them, appreciated them. But apparently, when it came to his personal life, to the possibility of romance, he'd drawn an invisible line without even realizing it. And his daughters, with their 9-year-old clarity, had seen right past that line. "She's nice, Daddy," Claire said. "She always explains things when we visit the engineering deck. She doesn't talk down to us like some of the other adults." "You've been visiting engineering?" Andrew asked, momentarily distracted. "Educational tours," Megan said quickly. "Every Tuesday. Miss Kira runs them for kids who want to learn about how the station works. She's really patient. And funny. She tells jokes about quantum mechanics." Andrew stared at them. His daughters had been spending time with this woman for weeks, months maybe, and he hadn't even known. They'd gotten to know her, learned about her, decided she was kind and patient and worthy of their father's attention. While he'd walked past her in the corridors and never even stopped to say thank you. "We should go say hello," Claire said, already starting to pull him forward. Andrew's feet felt frozen to the deck. Across the plaza, Kira finished adjusting her display and stepped back to examine it. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed once, satisfaction maybe or approval of her work. She looked content there by herself, comfortable in her own space. "Daddy?" Megan tugged his other hand. "Come on. Don't be scared." But Andrew was scared. Scared of his own guilt, his own assumptions, his own careful walls. Scared that his daughters saw something in him he didn't want to face. Scared that they might be right. Before Andrew could stop them, Claire and Megan had already let go of his hands and were weaving through the crowd toward Kira. He hurried after them, his heart pounding harder than it should for such a simple thing as talking to someone. Kira noticed the girls approaching and her posture shifted, straightening slightly, her bioluminescent patterns brightening just a bit. Andrew saw recognition cross her angular features, saw all 4 of her eyes focus on the twins with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Miss Kira?" Claire called out, waving enthusiastically. "Hello, young engineers," Kira said, and her voice was deeper than Andrew expected, with a musical quality that made each word sound deliberately chosen. "Are you enjoying the festival?" "It's amazing," Megan said. "But we actually came to find you." Andrew caught up to them, breathing a bit harder than he should be. Up close, Kira was even taller than he remembered, nearly 7 feet. Her midnight blue skin was marked with silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow like water under the festival lights. She wore a simple work uniform, practical and clean, with modifications to accommodate her 4 arms. Her 4 eyes shifted to Andrew, and he saw her stiffen slightly. Did she remember him? Did she know he was the father who'd never bothered to thank her properly? "This is our daddy," Claire announced, as if Kira might not have figured that out. "We've met," Kira said quietly. "During the emergency. I'm glad to see you all well." The shame burned hotter in Andrew's chest. "I need to apologize," he said, the words tumbling out before he could plan them. "I never thanked you. Not properly. You saved my daughter's lives and I left. I'm sorry." Kira's patterns pulsed once, surprise maybe or something else Andrew couldn't read. "There's nothing to apologize for," she said. "You were frightened for your children. That's natural. And any decent person would have done the same thing I did. But you did it," Andrew insisted. "And I should have said something. Should have found you afterward." One of Kira's lower hands made a gesture that might have been a wave of dismissal. "The important thing is that Claire and Megan were safe. The rest doesn't matter." "It matters to us," Megan said firmly. Then she reached into the small bag she'd been carrying and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Which is why we made you this." She handed the paper to Kira, who took it carefully with one of her upper hands. She unfolded it with surprising delicacy for such large fingers. Andrew craned his neck to see and realized it was a hand-drawn invitation, decorated with colorful markers and what looked like glitter glue. "You are invited to a tea party," Kira read aloud, her voice soft. "Saturday at 1400 hours. Quarters C-247. Please come. We have cookies." "We're going to make them ourselves," Claire added. "Well, with Daddy's help. But we'll decorate them." Andrew watched Kira's face as she looked at the invitation. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered rapidly, colors shifting through shades of silver and pale gold. Her 4 eyes had taken on a glossy sheen, and with a start, Andrew realized she was holding back tears. Kira's voice caught slightly. "This is very kind. I would be honored to attend your tea party." The twins beamed at each other, then at Andrew, then at Kira. "Perfect," Claire said. "We'll see you Saturday." "Don't be late," Megan added seriously. "The cookies are best when they're fresh." Kira carefully folded the invitation and tucked it into one of her uniform pockets. "I wouldn't miss it," she promised. The girls chattered a bit more about the festival, pointing out displays they'd seen and asking Kira about the engineering project she'd been working on. Andrew stood there, watching, seeing how naturally his daughters interacted with her. How comfortable they were. How Kira listened to them with complete attention, all 4 eyes focused, responding to their questions with respect and patience. Finally, the girls announced they wanted to go see the Andraxian light sculptures, and they said goodbye to Kira with promises to see her Saturday. As they walked away, Andrew glanced back once. Kira had taken the invitation out of her pocket again and was looking at it with an expression he couldn't quite read. That night, after the girls were in bed, Andrew sat in his small quarters with his personal data pad. He'd meant to catch up on diplomatic reports. Instead, he found himself searching for information about Threndian culture. He should have done this years ago. He was a diplomatic liaison. Understanding other cultures was literally his job. But he'd focused on the species involved in his negotiations and trade agreements. He'd never bothered to learn about the Threndians working quietly in engineering, in maintenance, in the dozens of support roles that kept the station running. The more he read, the more ashamed he felt. Threndians were deeply family-oriented. They valued actions over words, loyalty over flash. They formed bonds slowly but permanently. They were known across the galaxy for their engineering skills and their steadfast reliability. They were also, according to several sources, one of the most discriminated against species in the Alliance. Their appearance made other species uncomfortable. For arms seemed like too many. For eyes seemed like they were always watching. Their height was intimidating. Their patterns were beautiful but alien. And so they were respected for their skills but rarely included socially. Rarely seen as anything more than the work they did. Andrew had seen it himself, he realized now that he was paying attention. Over the next few days, he found himself watching Kira when he saw her around the station. She moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency, acknowledging greetings but rarely stopping to chat. In the commissary, she ate alone, reading technical manuals while she consumed her meals with methodical precision. But he also saw her in engineering during one of the Tuesday educational tours his daughters had mentioned. He'd stopped by, purely out of curiosity, he told himself, and watched from the doorway as Kira explained how the station's artificial gravity worked. She used all 4 hands to demonstrate, creating a visual model that made the complex physics accessible to children. She was patient when they asked questions, even the silly ones. She made jokes that were terrible puns about quantum mechanics, and the kids groaned but laughed anyway. Andrew also noticed how the other engineers treated her. Professionally, certainly. But there was a distance there. They asked her technical questions and accepted her expertise, but nobody invited her to join them for lunch. Nobody included her in their casual conversations. She was respected but not welcomed. It reminded him uncomfortably of how he'd treated her. With professional courtesy and nothing more. His daughters, meanwhile, had been visiting her every Tuesday for months. They'd learned basic Threndian greetings. They'd asked about her homeworld, her interests, her favorite foods. They judged her by her kindness and patience, not by how many arms she had or whether her eyes were arranged in a familiar pattern. They'd seen a person worth knowing, worth caring about. And they'd put in the effort to know her, effort that Andrew, as a supposedly open-minded diplomat, had never bothered with. Saturday came faster than Andrew expected. He helped the girls make cookies, supervising while they mixed dough and rolled it out and used cookie cutters in various shapes. They decorated each cookie with careful concentration, using colored icing and sprinkles with artistic enthusiasm. At exactly 1400 hours their door chimed. Claire and Megan raced to answer it, practically bouncing with excitement. Kira stood in the doorway and Andrew saw she'd changed from her work uniform into something more formal, a flowing garment in deep purple that somehow accommodated all four arms gracefully. She carried a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I brought gifts," she said, offering the package to the girls. "I hope that's appropriate." "You didn't have to do that," Andrew said, but the twins were already tearing into the wrapping with gleeful abandon. Inside were two items: a hand-carved puzzle box for Claire, intricate and beautiful, and a technical drawing kit for Megan, with tools that looked far more advanced than anything Andrew could have found in the station shops. "These are perfect," Megan breathed, examining the drawing tools with reverent care. "How did you know what we'd like?" Claire asked, already working at the puzzle box. Kira's patterns pulsed in warm gold. "I pay attention," she said simply. And Andrew realized that while he'd been learning about Threndian culture from articles and databases, Kira had been learning about his daughters from actual time spent with them. From listening and watching and caring enough to remember what made them unique. The tea party began and Andrew found himself relaxing despite his nervousness. Kira fit into their small quarters more easily than he'd expected. She sat carefully on their furniture, managing her height and her extra arms with practiced grace. She praised the cookies with genuine enthusiasm, even though Andrew suspected Threndian taste buds might not find them as appealing as human ones did. And slowly, over tea and cookies and the girls' excited chatter, Andrew began to see what his daughters had seen all along. Not a Threndian engineer. Not someone with 4 arms and 4 eyes and midnight blue skin. Just Kira. Kind and patient and funny in her own quiet way. Just someone worth knowing. The tea party had been going for almost an hour when Kira reached into the pocket of her purple garment and pulled out one more item. It was small, a data chip in a simple silver case. "I almost didn't bring this," she said quietly, turning it over in one of her upper hands. But it felt appropriate. She held it out to Andrew. He took it carefully, confused. "What is it?" "A poem," Kira said. "My bondmate's favorite. He used to recite it when things were difficult. When we needed to remember why we kept going." Her bioluminescent patterns dimmed slightly, fading to a soft blue-gray. "He died 5 years ago. Engineering accident on a mining station near the outer rim." The words hit Andrew like a physical thing. He looked down at the data chip in his hand, then back up at Kira. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with every part of himself. "I didn't know." "How could you?" Kira's voice was gentle. "We don't really know each other. But I wanted you to have it because I understand what it means to lose someone. To try to keep going for others when your own heart feels broken." Claire and Megan had gone very quiet. They looked at Kira with wide, serious eyes. "Do you still miss him?" Claire asked softly. "Every day," Kira said without hesitation. "But missing someone and being destroyed by their absence are different things. My people believe that the dead are honored most by the living choosing to find joy again. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but allowing new happiness to exist alongside the old grief." Andrew felt something tight in his chest loosen just slightly. For 2 years he carried guilt about any moment of happiness. Anytime he laughed at something or enjoyed a meal or felt content, there was a voice in his head saying he shouldn't feel those things. That feeling good somehow meant he was forgetting Sarah, betraying her memory. "My wife died 2 years ago," he heard himself say. "Cancer. It was fast, only 4 months from diagnosis to..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The girls were 7. They barely got to say goodbye. Kira's patterns shifted to a soft, warm gold. "That's very young to lose a mother. They're brave children." "They're amazing," Andrew agreed, looking at his daughters. "Stronger than I am most days." "Strength isn't always loud," Kira said. "Sometimes it's just getting up each morning and choosing to try again." They fell into conversation then, real conversation in a way Andrew hadn't experienced in a long time. Kira told them about her bondmate, Thren, an engineer like herself. They'd worked together for 15 years, building stations and ships across 3 systems. He'd been brilliant and funny and terrible at remembering to eat when he was focused on a project. Andrew talked about Sarah. About how she'd been a teacher, how she'd loved terrible puns and old Earth movies. How she'd insisted they move to Horizon Station because she wanted the girls to grow up seeing the universe as bigger than just humanity. How he still sometimes turned to tell her something before remembering she wasn't there. "Does it get easier?" Andrew asked. "Yes and no," Kira said honestly. "The sharp pain fades. But there are moments, a smell, a phrase, a particular quality of light, that bring it all back for a second. The trick is learning to let those moments happen without letting them pull you under. How do you do that? Kira's lower hands gestured gracefully. You remember that your bond mate, your wife, wouldn't want you drowning in grief. You honor them by living the life they wanted you to have. By being present for the people who still need you. She looked at Claire and Megan. By being the parent your children deserve. The girls had been listening to all of this with quiet attention. Now Megan climbed into Andrew's lap, tucking her head under his chin. Claire leaned against Kira's side, and after a moment's hesitation, Kira wrapped one of her lower arms gently around the girl's shoulders. Mommy used to say that love doesn't end, Claire said softly. She said it just changes shape. Like water becoming ice or steam. It's still water, just different. Your mother was wise, Kira said. They talked about other things than lighter topics. Kira told stories about her homeworld, a planet of vast crystal caves where Threndians had evolved their 4 arms to navigate complex 3-dimensional spaces. The girls were fascinated, asking endless questions about the bioluminescent patterns that covered Kira's skin. They show emotion, Kira explained. Gold for happiness or contentment. Blue-gray for sadness. Red for anger, though I rarely feel angry. Silver for curiosity. They shift depending on what I'm feeling. What about purple? Megan asked, pointing to a faint purple shimmer along Kira's shoulder. Kira's patterns flickered, and she glanced at Andrew before answering. Purple is affection. Fondness. It means I care about the people I'm with. The girls seemed satisfied with that answer. They showed Kira their room, cluttered with drawings and schoolwork and a collection of rocks they'd found in various parts of the station. Kira admired everything with genuine interest, asking questions that proved she was really listening. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Claire and Megan grew quieter, their excitement wearing into comfortable tiredness. They ended up curled together on the couch, fighting to keep their eyes open, while Andrew and Kira talked in low voices at the table. They're good children, Kira said, watching them fondly. You've done well with them. I'm trying, Andrew said. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. Like I'm one crisis away from completely falling apart. But you haven't fallen apart, Kira pointed out. You've kept going. That's what matters. They want me to be happy again, Andrew admitted. This whole tea party thing, it's part of a larger plan they have. They've decided I need someone in my life. And what do you think? Kira asked. Andrew looked at her, really looked at her. The graceful way she held herself, the intelligence in her 4 eyes, the patience she'd shown his daughters. The kindness that radiated from her like her bioluminescent patterns. I think, he said slowly, that I've been hiding. Using my grief as a shield to avoid risking anything. And I think my 9-year-old daughters might be braver and wiser than I am. Kira's patterns shifted through several colors. Surprise, pleasure, something that might have been hope. Both girls were fully asleep now, Claire snoring softly. Kira stood carefully, gathering her things. I should go. It's late and I have an early shift tomorrow. Andrew walked her to the door, his heart suddenly pounding. At the threshold, Kira turned back, and her patterns were swirling with colors he couldn't identify. Thank you, she said. For inviting me. For sharing your family with me. For... She paused. For seeing me. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Andrew understood what she meant, not just being seen as a Threndian or an engineer but as a person. As someone worth knowing. Would you like to have dinner sometime? The words came out before Andrew could overthink them. Just the 2 of us. No kids, no tea party. Just dinner. Kira's patterns flared brilliant gold, so bright Andrew had to blink. Yes, she said, and her voice carried pure joy. I would like that very much. They arranged a time, next Friday at a small restaurant on the promenade that served food from a dozen different worlds. After Kira left, Andrew stood in his doorway for a long moment, holding the data chip she'd given him. He looked at his sleeping daughters, curled together like they'd done since they were babies. They'd pushed him toward Kira, toward the possibility of connection again. And maybe, just maybe, they'd been right. The dinner had been perfect. Then the next dinner. And the one after that. Before Andrew quite realized how it had happened, Kira had become part of their lives. She came over twice a week, sometimes more. She helped the girls with their science homework, explaining complex concepts with the patience of someone who genuinely loved teaching. She fixed things around their quarters that Andrew had been meaning to get to for months. A sticky door, a flickering light panel, a drawer that wouldn't close properly. She fit into their small family like she'd always been meant to be there. One evening, about 3 weeks after that first dinner, Claire and Megan insisted on teaching Kira their bedtime story game. It was something Sarah had invented years ago. Each person added one sentence to a story, taking turns seeing where the tale would go. The results were always chaotic and usually hilarious. They sat in the dimmed living area, and Andrew watched as his daughters explained the rules to Kira with great seriousness. Kira listened carefully, her 4 eyes focused on them with complete attention. "I'll start," Megan announced. Once upon a time there was a space station that could fly. The space station was lonely, Claire continued, because all the other space stations stayed in one place. So it decided to go on an adventure, Andrew added, settling into the familiar rhythm of the game. Kira was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "And it met a comet who was also traveling alone, and they became friends." The girls cheered at this addition, and the story continued, getting wilder with each sentence. At some point, the flying space station befriended a colony of singing asteroids and started a traveling circus. Andrew found himself laughing harder than he had in months. But what made the moment magical was Kira's bioluminescent patterns. As she got more involved in the story, more excited by the girls' creative additions, her patterns began to pulse and swirl. Gold for happiness, silver for curiosity, and flashes of other colors Andrew was still learning to recognize. The patterns created their own light show across the ceiling and walls, dancing with the rhythm of her emotions. Claire and Megan were mesmerized. They'd stopped paying attention to the story and were just watching the lights, their faces full of wonder. "That's so beautiful," Megan whispered. Kira looked surprised, glancing down at her own arms as if she'd forgotten she was doing it. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to distract." "Don't apologize," Andrew said quickly. "It's amazing." Kira's patterns shifted to a soft purple, affection, and Andrew felt his own heart shift in response. This was becoming real. What had started as his daughter's matchmaking scheme had grown into something genuine and deep and slightly terrifying in its intensity. The following week, Andrew was in the station commissary grabbing lunch when he ran into Gerald Thompson, a human technical officer he'd worked with on a few trade agreements. They chatted about work while Andrew waited for his food order. "So I hear you're dating now," Gerald said, his tone casual but carrying an edge Andrew didn't like. "News travels fast on a station," Andrew replied carefully. "Yeah, well?" Gerald leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Just between us, man, dating an alien? Really? I mean, there are plenty of human women on the station. Why complicate things?" Andrew felt something cold settle in his stomach. Before he could respond, he heard a small voice behind him. "She's not an alien." He turned to find Claire standing there, her face flushed red, her hands clenched into fists. Megan stood beside her, equally angry. "She's Kira," Claire continued, her voice shaking but fierce. "And she's wonderful. She's kind and smart and she makes our daddy smile. She's more wonderful than you'll ever be." Gerald looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting to be called out by a 9-year-old. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," Megan interrupted. "You meant it exactly how it sounded. You think Kira isn't good enough because she doesn't look like you. But that's your problem, not hers." Several other people in the commissary had stopped to watch. Andrew felt pride surge through him, his daughters standing up for someone they cared about, refusing to let casual prejudice go unchallenged. "Girls," he said softly, putting a hand on each of their shoulders. Then he looked at Gerald. "They're right. Kira is wonderful. And if you have a problem with who I choose to spend time with, that's something you need to examine in yourself." Gerald muttered something about not meaning any offense and retreated quickly. Andrew guided his daughters to a table, his mind racing. "We're not sorry," Claire said immediately. "He was being mean." "I know," Andrew said. "And I'm proud of you for standing up for Kira. But..." He paused, trying to figure out how to phrase what he needed to ask. "Are you really okay with this? With me and Kira? It's a big change. If it makes you uncomfortable." "Why would it make us uncomfortable?" Megan asked, genuinely confused. "Well, she's Threndian. She's different from us. Some people might." "Daddy," Claire interrupted, using that particular tone that meant she thought he was being silly. "We don't care that she's Threndian. We care that she's nice. That she listens to us. That she makes you happy." She reached across the table to take his hand. "We never thought about her being an alien. We just thought about her being Kira." Andrew looked at his daughters, these incredible, wise, unprejudiced children, and felt something break open in his chest. They'd never seen Kira as different. Never hesitated, never questioned. They judged her by her character, by her actions, by the content of her heart. They'd been trying to teach him that lesson all along. That evening there was a minor emergency on the station. Nothing like the catastrophic breach from months before, but serious enough. A power fluctuation in one of the residential sectors threatened to take down life support. Andrew, in his capacity as diplomatic liaison, found himself coordinating with station command to evacuate the affected area. Kira was leading the engineering response team. Andrew watched her work through the command center's monitors. She moved with absolute confidence, all four arms in constant motion as she directed her team, made calculations, rerouted power systems. She stayed calm when one of her junior technicians panicked, talking him through the procedure with patience even as the clock ticked down. She was magnificent. The crisis was resolved in 40 minutes. Life support was restored, no one was hurt, and the residents were able to return to their quarters. Andrew found Kira in the engineering section afterward, reviewing data logs to figure out what had caused the fluctuation in the first place. "You were amazing," he said from the doorway. She looked up, her patterns flickering with surprise. "I was doing my job. You saved 100 people tonight." "My team saved them," she corrected. "I just coordinated." Andrew stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." He took a breath, knowing this was a moment he couldn't take back. "When that breach happened 6 months ago, when you saved my daughters, I was grateful, but I was also relieved when it was over. Relieved I didn't have to think about how close I'd come to losing them. About how much I owed you." He paused. "Tonight, watching you work, I wasn't relieved. I was proud. Proud to know you. Proud that you're in our lives." Kira's patterns began to swirl, gold and purple and silver mixing together. "I trust you," Andrew continued. "Not just with my heart, but with everything that matters to me. With my daughters' lives. With my future." He stepped closer. "I'm falling in love with you, Kira. Maybe I already have fallen. And that terrifies me, but not because of who you are. Because of how much it matters." For a moment, Kira was absolutely still. Then her patterns exploded into light, brilliant gold and purple and colors Andrew had never seen before, swirling across her skin in waves. It was like watching fireworks, like watching joy made visible. "I love you too," she said, and her voice shook. "I've been afraid to say it. Afraid you might change your mind. Afraid this was too good to be real." Andrew reached out and took one of her hands, one of her upper hands, the ones she used for delicate work. "It's real. The girls were right. They saw what I was too scared to see. They're wise children. They're incredible children," Andrew agreed. "And they chose you. Not because they wanted just anyone. Because they saw who you really are." Kira's other upper hand came up to touch his face, gentle despite its size. "I never expected this," she whispered. "A family. A second chance. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone." "So did I," Andrew admitted. But 2 9-year-olds had other plans. They stood there in the quiet engineering section, holding each other while Kira's patterns painted light across the walls. Andrew thought about Sarah, about how she'd wanted the girls to see the universe as bigger than just humanity. About how she'd probably be laughing at him right now, delighted that he'd finally stopped being so careful, so guarded. 2 weeks later, Andrew made a video call to Earth, to his mother who still lived in the house where he'd grown up. Claire and Megan sat on either side of him, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom," he said when her face appeared on the screen, "there's someone I want you to meet." Kira stepped into view and Andrew watched his mother's face go through several expressions: surprise, confusion, and then as the girls started talking excitedly about their friend Kira, slow understanding. "She's going to be part of our family, Grandma," Megan announced with absolute certainty. "If that's okay with you," Kira added quickly, and Andrew loved her even more for caring about his mother's approval even though she didn't need it. His mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Anyone who makes my son smile like that and who my granddaughters love this much, is more than okay with me. Welcome to the family, Kira." That night, after the call, after dinner, after the girls had finally gone to bed, Andrew and Kira sat together in the quiet living area. Her patterns were a soft, contented gold. His hand was wrapped around 2 of hers. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For being patient with me. For giving me time to catch up to what the girls already knew." Kira's patterns shifted to purple. "They're remarkable. They saw your heart," Andrew said. "When I was still seeing differences, they were seeing what matters." "Maybe that's humanity's real strength," Kira mused. "Not your technology or your ambition, but your children's ability to see past surfaces to the truth underneath." Andrew pulled her closer, feeling her warmth, her solidity, her realness. His daughters had given him this, had pushed him toward connection when he wanted to hide, toward love when he was content with just existing. They'd given him a second chance at family, at happiness, at life, and he would spend every day making sure they knew how grateful he was.